Today, I'm joined by a special guest with over 25 years of service at the FBI, Chris Piehota, to go through some of the biggest stories in the news. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be with you and your audience today.
Let me give some background on yourself. So you were the executive assistant director of the FBI. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this position, if you were still there today, you would be feeding data, intel, case information up to Director Dan Bongino and Kash Patel. Is that right?
That's correct. My chain of command was the deputy director and then the director.
Okay. So very, very high up. You've also authored a book, Wanted, the FBI I Once Knew. I want to ask you about that here in a minute. Let me get your thoughts on this. From my perspective, this Middle East tour that the president is doing right now, I see President Trump. I believe he sees the Middle East as a wealthy place that he wants investing in America, having a better relationship with America, versus having them turn to China like so many other countries have. I wanted to get your thoughts from an FBI perspective, also a national security perspective. How do you see what Trump is doing in the Middle East?
What the president's doing is he's making some very strategic moves when it comes to the relationships that form up the global community. There are three areas of power that exist in the world. You have economic, political, and military power. Everything else is derived from those three or a combination of those three. And I see what the president's doing now is he's trying to reset some of those relationships to show that we are not adversarial to the Middle Eastern countries. Also, to rekindle some of the partnerships that existed previously and to seek investment in the United States and the success of the United States so that our Middle Eastern allies and partners have a vested interest in seeing the United States prosper. If the United States is prosperous, the rest of the world prospers. So what I think he's doing is he's resetting the stage for a lot of those strategic relationships.
Okay. The speech that he gave in Saudi Arabia was very interesting. He said, that past presidents, past administrations had spent trillions of dollars destroying the Middle East, where Saudi Arabia, they had spent trillions of dollars building the Middle East, and that he wanted to reshape America to be about building. Do you think that is possible? I mean, he is a very bold leader. It seems like he has a vision, and part of that is, he's bringing in money from Japan, from the Middle East, all over the world, trying to re-strengthen America. Do you think this is possible? Because Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, those jobs are gone. That idea is dead. It's not going to happen.
Well, he's shown that he could do it in his first administration, right? And he's trying to recreate that success and prosperity for the American people. And again, a prosperous America makes for a prosperous global community. So I think he can do it again. What I think he's going to run into is the shifting relationships, and we're watching the balance of power in the world move and shift from the model that was set after World War II. We're starting to see different alliances. Certain allies have drifted apart. Certain adversaries have drifted together. And we're looking at just a change in certain social trends around the world that'll make it a little more challenging for him. But as you said, he is a determined leader and he is a great businessman. I have nothing but faith in his ability to bring those jobs back or to increase the investment in American industry and American success.
Okay. I know since leaving the FBI, you now run your own company with leadership training and coaching and different things like that. Is it fair to say that much of the economic world didn't understand how Trump was using tariffs as a way to reshuffle the board? They were looking at it purely economical. He was looking at it as, how do I get the border under control? How do I get this war ended? How do I rebalance China? How do I capture the Middle East and their money? What are your thoughts on him using tariffs as a way of reshuffling the board?
Well, I think a lot of us think day to day, right? We think day to day, week to week. He's looking years ahead, and he's trying to use the tariffs to bring people back to the bargaining table, to reset those relationships, and to redefine the parameters in which we conduct business with our global partners and our global competitors. So I think his use of tariffs was a very bold and effective, as we see, move to bring people to the bargaining table and look to, I guess you can say, dispel or to diminish some of the areas of disadvantage that the United States has put itself in over the decades. He's going to have to try to fix in 4 years. So he's using some very bold moves, and I think his use of tariffs, once people give it a chance to take place, and you can start seeing the results, I think folks are, in the future, are going to look back on this as a very, I could say, successful and prosperous. I keep using that word, but a prosperous approach for the United States.
Hey, I love prosperity, so keep using it. One thing that I want to understand, FBI Director Kash Patel, he put out, "I can now confirm reports that our FBI team and partners foiled an attempted ISIS attack on a U.S. military base up in Warren, Michigan." Do you know much about this, and how would the FBI be involved? Would they have shared that intel with local police, or would they then take over once a situation is tamped down?
Well, the FBI is the nation's primary investigative and intelligence organization for counterterrorism matters that are stateside, that are within the continental United States. So anything that comes to their attention or the attention of our other law enforcement and intelligence partners would eventually come to the FBI for investigation and then threat interdiction or action. So that the FBI is the lead agency for counterterrorism matters in the U.S. Now, we work with a network of state and local law enforcement partners, as well as our other federal partners. Everybody gathers information day to day. We conduct our own, I say our, there, I'm no longer there. But we conduct the investigative work in a predictive and preventative manner. And obviously, some of the intelligence and tripwire networks became aware of this individual and his intentions to attack that military facility. And as you saw, they were able to conduct a great operation to prevent anybody from being harmed.
Yes, yeah, and thank goodness they did. Since being sworn in as the director of the FBI and Dan Bongino as the deputy director, I feel like they are much more communicative as individuals than, say, Christopher Wray and others, pointing out, we collected this much fentanyl, we busted these MS-13 gang members, we captured these Tren de Aragua, we prevented this Michigan terrorist attack. Do you think that that is helpful to the American people, or do you think that it's maybe frustrating where there's a lot of MAGA people that are like, why aren't you just arresting members of Congress? Why aren't you investigating things that matter to us? What are your thoughts on their communication?
I think it has a double edge to it, right? I think there are people who like to hear more about some of what I consider to be routine FBI work that you generally didn't hear about. And if you did hear about it, it was more on a local basis. The head of a FBI field office would do a press conference locally. What you're hearing about, a lot of those arrests are honestly, that's routine FBI work that goes on every day, and it has gone on for decades, and it will go on for decades. But I do think there is a part of the population that likes that information to be put out a little more freely and broadly across the social media networks. The challenge I see with that is that too much messaging then numbs the public. So when the FBI director or the deputy director make a direct personal posting, everybody's head should snap in that direction. And I think after a while, you start getting that, here's another one, right? And here's the other challenge is that you give your critics and people who you might consider to be non-supporters a lot more ability to critique, criticize, or downplay your success. Because as you said, if you pick up a couple of members of the trained the Aragua or MS-13 gang, you're going to have about 50-50 now saying, well, what about the Epstein list? Where's this? Where's that? You're not doing what you promised, right? So it cuts both ways. And I think that if it was up to me, if I was to offer counsel to the director Patel or the deputy director Bongino, I would save their personal communications for very impactful issues and leave the more, I would call, routine FBI work, move that back to the field offices and let them talk about it. They can post it on social media from their field office locations. And like the other day when the Attorney General Bondi and Kash Patel talked about the interdiction of 205 individuals, part of that child exploitation network, definitely worth their time to announce that. But other things, I think they've got to push that back down to the field office, let the field office commanders make those notifications, and reserve that very impacting, attention-getting information management for themselves.
Okay, that's interesting, because that's the exact example that I thought of, and I appreciate what you said. Like, if Dan Bongino or Kash Patel, they make an announcement, like, boom, everybody should pay attention. Like, hey, we don't make announcements very often. This is big. At the same time, when they got that child exploitation ring and it's over 200 people, I was like, yes, this is what I voted for. I want these people off the streets, away from my children. So I totally hear what you're saying. I do wonder if, just being in the podcast world myself, there's a part where Dan Bongino, he's so used to communicating stories that it's like almost like second nature, and where Kash Patel was being interviewed a lot before that. I wonder if there's still some of that in them where they're like, oh, okay, we want to put out these daily announcements. But as you say, it could be a double-edged sword where people are now going, hey, I only want to hear from you when it's the big thing that I really care about. That's a really interesting point.
Well, I'll tell you what, the other side of that too, there's another part of that argument where I think that they being the leadership of the FBI is trying to show the American public the FBI is back on the job. The FBI is out there making your community safer. We're no longer distracted by some other peripheral matters that may have been dominating FBI time and attention over the last several years. So I think they're trying to do that too. And I understand the intent, but at a certain point, I think you come to that fork in the road where you have to say, okay, we're going to cut off now. We're going to stay out on the strategic decisions, strategic comms, and we're going to let the rest of it go to our field commanders and other folks to inform the public.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. You brought up, people want to know about the Jeffrey Epstein. So I got to ask you about it. The one of the comms that they put out, this goes to your example, we're going to put this information out on day one. Well, on day one, you've got so much going on. Like, you don't even know the case yourself. You don't know what you can release. So I think that was bad on that part. On the other hand, now we're finding out that there's all these tapes of exploitation of children, maybe well-known people. We don't really know. Somebody has to go through all of that. Do you think we're at the stage right now where the DOJ and the FBI, they're working hand in hand to put together a solid case of what can and can't be released and what people they may or may not need to go after?
I think first thing I would recommend to all of our senior leaders is to remove the terminology of day one from their lexicon. Right. I think what you're doing there is you're making promises or assertions to the public that you may not be able to keep. Because I think what would have been a more fair assessment was, on day one, we are going to begin an in-depth review of what the previous administration's actions were, so that we can see if anything was missed, or we can see what they accomplished, or what work has to be done, and we can give you an assessment then. Right? That to me would have been the more prudent day one statement. As far as the Epstein materials go, they being the Department of Justice, FBI, they will be looking at that material minute by minute by minute, because what they're going to try and do is establish investigative evidence. They have to copy master everything they're going to use. And there may be some other interests involved where there may be other parts of the government that have to be brought in for a review and a consultation on what exactly they're going to do with some of this. It's not so simple as when I was in charge of a field office, and to be honest, and it's terrible, but child exploitation and crimes against children on the internet, I mean, it's like shooting fish in a bucket. Terrible, right?
Yeah.
That's not this situation. This situation has a lot of complexity to it. And what I think happened when the Attorney General Bondi first came out with her statements on it, I told some people, I said, what you saw there was a staff failure. Her staff failed to inform her that, yes, you have a package on your desk, madam. However, 95% of it has already been out in the public. And we still have this stuff to go through. So here's what we recommend as the announcement content, right? I don't think that happened. I think there was a lot of chaos going on, and there was a rush to get that information out. And as always, faster is not better, right? And same thing with Mr. Patel and all those guys. You get caught up in the emotion of the situation as opposed to saying this information is under review. And I did a podcast with one of the congressmen a while back, and we talked about the Epstein stuff. And I said, look, let's the world I lived in, okay? There may be footage and information in that investigation that steps outside of the criminal investigative realm. There may be information there that runs into more of the shadow world of counterintelligence and how we deal with some of our international partners and competitors and rivals. Okay. So there are some other equities that may be in play that are much more complex and much more, I would say, difficult to put out in the public than people would believe. And I think there's a certain naivete when you just say, well, just publish everything. Maybe not, right? Yeah. So I think there are some different interests that may be at play right now. And I also told that congressman, I said, and do you think for a second that if the United States and its intelligence community could use some of that information to gain a strategic advantage over, again, one of our international rivals or competitors, or to compromise certain elements of international organized crime, do you think we would not keep it to ourselves and use it in that capacity? So again, I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying there may be other equities in play, plus just the manpower and the due diligence that's required when you're dealing with those type of materials.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel bad for the man or woman that has to review all those tapes, because I've seen documentaries on busting these pedophile rings, and the people are like, it's just disgusting. And so I feel for the person that has to do that job, and yet it has to be done.
Well, I'll tell you this, just for a quick comment on that, we do have people who step up to take that tough duty. It's corrosive. It's difficult. We make sure that they get what we used to call safeguard checks every once in a while, make sure they were okay. For some people, we would rotate them out after a certain period of time. And you're right. Looking at that type of information, it brings you down into the sewers of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. God bless the people that have to go through that. Okay, without being too silly or anything, since I've got you on here, is there a division within the FBI that is similar to the XFiles, where agents are asked to go investigate strange anomalies or UFO or just the weird stuff that happens on planet Earth?
You know what? I wish there was, but unfortunately, I have to say that no. Okay. There isn't an XFiles component or division. The only time the FBI would get called in, it would be as a support entity for maybe somebody at the Department of Defense, or some other entity that would be more engaged directly with an extraterrestrial incident. The FBI would be brought in maybe as a support element, or just I have to look at the, spread culpability maybe at some point, who knows? But there is no such thing. A lot of people ask me, is it like Criminal Minds and all those other shows? And I used to tell them, man, I wish it was, but it just, a lot of days it's not that fun.
Yeah, it's just kind of the day-to-day grind. Um, you rose over your 25-year career to your last position.
Mhm.
Once you're at that level, are you participating in like the big mysterious cases? So, for example, the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, some of those bigger cases, or does that typically stay within a certain region? I'm just wondering how involved top brass gets when it comes to like those big mysterious bombings or explosions or assassination attempts, things like that.
Yeah, what you're looking at is in the field office of the FBI setup. There are 55 field offices. They will run the primary investigative work in the geographic area that an incident occurs, or if it's a nationwide case, like such as the Unabomber, you'll have coordination out of FBI headquarters, because FBI headquarters then manages a great amount of material, manpower, resources, financing, and there's a lot of the business side of things that happen out of the Hoover Building in DC. You also provide that strategic integration with our other federal, state, and local partners to make sure that we are doing things in a layered, coordinated approach, right? But we leave the investigative work, that FBI agent, case agent work, goes to the field offices, and there are field commanders, the special agents in charge of those offices, that oversee the daily investigative work that is done. They bring that information, they provide summaries and activity reports back to headquarters, so that then again we're operating as a collaborative, coordinated machine, not only inside the bureau, but throughout the government, because many things have different equities. And not only that, but a lot of the federal partners bring different authorities and resources. So that's where the coordination happens, mostly in DC. But the investigative work, when you have an incident that happens in the field, FBI headquarters will send resources and send augmentation wherever needed, to help the field get the investigative or operational results we're looking for.
Okay.
So for me, I stopped doing all the fun stuff when I when I moved into leadership, right? But for me, I moved into leadership because I felt that I could help in different ways. We have remarkable investigative personnel, right? So it's not like, I was a drop in the bucket of water there, but I felt like there are other ways I can help from a programmatic standpoint to help those people, give them the time, the resources, the top cover to do things. And that's what the relationship was between headquarters and the field largely.
Okay. Something I wanted to ask somebody in the FBI, in Butler, Pennsylvania, when there was that assassination attempt against President Trump. You heard a lot about Secret Service on that day. You heard a lot about local police. Are FBI involved in the protection of a president when they're moving within the internal United States? And what were your thoughts on that day, in particular with this assassin?
First, the FBI does not have any protective responsibility or requirement when it comes to the movement of the president.
Okay.
Now, there are times when we will get requests for assistance on certain peripheral things, but largely it's the Secret Service is the primary authoritative function. They use and coordinate resources with state and local partners for presidential movement. Like I said, occasionally they'll ask us for help with something, but that's not the rule. Okay. As far as Butler went, I thought that was a colossal leadership failure on many levels. I thought what you saw there was the result of lax leadership, lax program management, lack of initiative. I mean, what you saw there was the result of just a, a maybe a decade, or maybe not even a decade, of just deterioration in the culture of the Secret Service. And I'm not blaming them on a personal level. I'm talking on a cultural level in the organization. That's what you saw that day. The lack of due diligence, just the way they conducted that site survey and the way they conducted the site security was terrible. And I think that's why you saw that, there had to be a leadership change, because the leadership at the top dictates the culture, the leadership environment, and the operational practices of an organization. And you saw what kind of state the Secret Service was in.
Yeah. I mean, just like tomorrow, I expect the sun to come up. The next day, the sun to come up. They had so many events or interactions where there was no problem. Everything went smoothly. We hadn't really had anything, I think, since the shooting of Ronald Reagan. Is that what you mean by lackadaisical, where it's just like so many things went right so many times that you just kind of start to assume it's going to go right again?
I think complacency sets in, right? And there's a saying, complacency kills. And once you start becoming complacent, you stop looking at certain things in that critical thinking fashion. And as you said, you start thinking, it'll be fine. No one's going to try this. And, maybe we're going overboard here, that type of thing. And I've heard it said in the news media, and I've heard it said in other places. What if that attempt was made by a trained assassination team, not the individual who actually tried to do it, who came very close, but I'm talking about a trained assassination team? President Trump would probably not be with us today.
Yeah, like after that, you saw all of these ex-military who were snipers come forward, and they were giving their opinion. And I do remember thinking one day, like, if one of them had like PTSD or a nervous breakdown, or CNN or somebody convinced them I've got to take out baby Hitler before he grows up, somebody with some serious skill, that would have been a horrible thing to happen on live TV. I'm so grateful it didn't go worse than it did.
But you know what, Stephen? We can't count on the incompetence of the adversary, right? I was listening to an interview with a military sniper. He said that based on the Secret Service's protocols, he would beat them 99 out of 100 times. He'd beat them.
Wow.
And some of our international rivals and our competitors on the world stage, you never know if somebody's going to crank off one day and just decide that they're going to give it a try, in a non-attributable fashion. So they got to do better in protecting he's the most powerful man in the Western world. And whether you like his politics or not, he's the president of the United States. And I think that, we can and should do better in protecting our chief executive.
I agree. I mean, I was no fan of Joseph Robinette Biden, but I did not want to see him taken out or like at the end of the day, this is still the president of our country making major decisions. Okay, so 25 years serving the country. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. What did you see change for good or bad in that 25-year span?
Well, when I started in the mid 90s, it was a different FBI, right? We were still the cops and robbers guys. We were still bank robberies and kidnappings and, maybe the old Silence of the Lambs type of storyline, right? That was the old FBI. And when I came in, I was very privileged to learn how to become an FBI agent under the old breed of agents. These were the old guys. I mean, we had some guys still wore fedoras to the office and stuff, right? I mean, these were old G men. But what I found is up through 2001, the FBI was still that organization. And then 2001 happened in September. We were shown that our business model was inadequate. And what we were also shown was that the adversary was better than we were. And as a result of that failure to see the operational horizon, people lost their loved ones. They lost family members and friends. And the FBI could never be the same afterwards. And, after that stunning failure that not just the FBI had, but across the U.S. government, but the FBI took its fair share of lumps, and deservedly, right? Because we were the primary protectors within the country. The FBI started changing its culture. The FBI went through a mandated culture change and went from being that, the world's premier law enforcement organization to being more of a domestic intelligence and security organization, which in some respects was required in the threat environment that existed at the time. But they took everything that was still good about the FBI and threw it away. Right? And as we moved through those years, the FBI leadership culture started changing. The leadership environment started changing. We started doing mass hiring of people, and we moved through those post 9/11 years. It was exhausting. The organization was fatigued, and I started seeing more of an FBI that was not as skillfully able to navigate some of the political influences, the pushing and shoving that used to go on in the DC environment. Also, when James Comey came on board, people say what they want about James Comey. He was actually a good guy to work for in the workplace. Didn't made some bad decisions, but he was actually a relief after 12 years of Bob Mueller's kind of whips and chains type of environment. And but that went too far, and they tried to corporatize the FBI. They started trying to run the FBI like it was Google or Netflix. And the FBI at its soul is a mission organization. It is not comparable to some Silicon Valley software company or a bank, or take your pick of what other organizations are out there. But that's what happened. And we started trying to run the FBI like Google. And I say we because I was there, and I wasn't in a decision-making capacity yet, but I was there and I saw it. And we started making it to where everything was negotiable. Everything became questionable. There wasn't any more that we will only tolerate the stoic, professional G-man, right? That kind of went away. And the organization just started going downhill. Standards started sliding a bit, not upheld as strictly. The senior agent cadre that I came in under largely had retired. So we lost all of those guys and ladies. And just the values started shifting. And people will say, no, they didn't. Okay, I was there. I'm telling you, they did. And you saw pictures of kneeling FBI agents in BLM protests and other examples of when I was there. If we would have ever even thought about kneeling at anything like that, we would have had our heads handed to us. So the culture changed, the leadership environment changed, and then they started diverting from their own tried and true operational practices. You saw during Crossfire Hurricane, when you read the Durham report, the Durham report said they did not do a good job. They did not do the things that the FBI would normally do. So standards fell, operational practices fell. And I think when after Director Comey was dismissed and then Director Wray came on board, Director Wray, he was not a bad guy. He gets a bad rap, but he was not a bad guy. The problem with Director Wray was that he was a caretaker director, right? He came in and he wasn't trying to change a lot. He wasn't trying to do a lot different, right? He just wanted to keep the ship off the rocks, so to speak. And what he did was he was isolated by, the organization. And he allowed factions of people to gain a lot more influence over how the organization was run and operated. And we continued down that road of, you want to call it, toward that kind of DEI mindset and all that kind of stuff. And that was happening while I was up there. And we used to get in some pretty heated knockdown, drag out arguments when I got to a senior position about, are you kidding me? What are we doing? Right. And, and while I could control things in my own areas, I couldn't control the whole organization. Right. And then at some point I knew it was time for me to go, and I was standing apart from the senior leadership more than I was standing with them. So I knew at that point, I was like, look, I'm not going to compromise any more of my personal beliefs or values to stay. I knew it was time to go, and that's when I retired.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, 25 year. I mean, think how much has just changed in the world in 25 years. Just imagine, within an organization trying to maintain a culture with culture shifting every so many years, technology, focus, mission, president, leader. It's amazing how well the FBI still does with an environment that is constantly shifting.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
The FBI is not what it once was. The FBI is not what the American people deserve and require for today's threat environment. The FBI was allowed to slide into mediocrity in some areas, and we raised it. We, again, not because I was there, but we allowed generations of leaders to form that were more interested in being liked than they were with being operationally effective. They wanted good. We had climate surveys. They wanted good climate surveys, and I'm thinking, we're supposed to be out there engaging with dangerous people, doing dangerous things on behalf of the United States and the American people, and we have people who are more concerned with climate survey results. So that's when I told you I kind of knew it was time for me to go, because I was still, the product of old FBI agent training and conditioning, and when we got to that point of administrative supremacy, I'll call it, and I knew it was time for me to go. So the FBI, I knew what it was, I saw what it became, and I know what it could be again for the American people with the right leadership environment. And the FBI that the American people need right now, it's not what it has to be with the emerging threat environment. We allowed a certain threat environment to form and intensify inside the country with the border control practices of the last administration. Not only that, but we're watching, again, global power shifting, and things are becoming a little more dangerous and complex on the global stage. And we do not need an FBI that is hobbled.
Okay. Tell me, in our final minutes, tell me about your book, Wanted, the FBI Once Knew. I know you've kind of just shared some of that,
Right.
but what is my audience going to learn by reading that book?
It's a 60-40 split on what I learned as far as being a FBI agent and how to lead. It's a leadership book on one level. It's also a chronicle of examples of how the FBI slipped. And I give examples from the Crossfire Hurricane through the Durham report, the Marjorie Stoneman school shooting, and there was another incident that happened with there was a bunch of Olympic female athletes that were being abused by one of the doctors at the Olympics, if you recall that disaster. And the disaster is no other word for it, an embarrassing disaster. The FBI completely failed those people. So I did an analysis of those cases as ways to show how the FBI culture had declined, how the leadership environment had declined. And what, in one part of the book, I just said, what happened to my FBI, right? And in the last part of the book, I give them some insight, again, from 25 years with the organization. Here's how we fix this. Here's how we get this done. Here's how we get the FBI back that is worthy of the trust and respect and admiration of the public that it serves. So I go through a bunch of steps on areas that the FBI should be looking at to make foundational change. And as I mentioned, culture, leadership environment, operational practices, and then there are areas that you can shore up to make sure that in those three strategic areas that we get that FBI back. And I was joking one day with somebody I was talking with. I said, the FBI's game plan for improvement should be like the movie Back to the Future, right? We got to go backwards to find out where we're going to go. We got to get back those FBI core G-man values that brought the FBI to that legendary status. And we got to make sure that we get all the folks back in line It's a mission organization. The FBI is not a job. I used to tell people, we're not bagging groceries here, folks. People depend on us for their lives and livelihoods. And I made 4 rules to live by in my book toward the end. And I said, if these 4 rules could be observed, the FBI would become unbeatable and unmatched again. Right? I had a whiteboard in my office. I used to have these rules written on the whiteboard. And the first one is, and forgive my profanity, but the first one is tough shit. Right? First rule: bad things happen. Things don't go according to plan. We do not buckle or cave in. We're the FBI. People depend on us. We do hard things without reservation. Second one is, if it doesn't suck, we don't do it. Because if it was easy, somebody else would have handled it. The FBI, by its nature, is expected to do the difficult, dangerous, and complex. So when people are scared and their lives are in danger and things really suck, they know that the FBI is their best bet, right?
Yeah.
The third rule is, assumption is the cause of bad things. Again, the things that we do in the FBI are too important to people's lives and livelihoods for us to make assumptions. We test for outcomes, we conduct investigation, and we ask earnest questions to figure things out. We don't assume. The last one is, never be a liability. Everywhere the FBI shows up, people should be glad to see us. They should expect our help, and they should expect that we will either be the best at something or we're going to be pretty damn good at it. And what I like to tell folks on that last one is, when we're in charge, we take charge, and we're respectful of what has to be done and by whom. When we're not in charge, we get behind and we provide horsepower. So when we're in charge, we pull. When we're not in charge, we push, and we're always an asset. And those 4 rules, if you just get back, they're very simple. There's nothing difficult there. There was no rocket science there. But the FBI would become unbeatable and unmatched once again if they can involve those 4 approaches into their daily culture, leadership environment, and operational practices.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to put a direct link to that down below. If people want to follow you, follow what you're doing, where can I point them, Chris?
I do X. That's my only social media thing. I do LinkedIn. I come from the world before time began, when social media was frowned upon. Right?
Okay.
We were not. We were not allowed. It was frowned upon to have social media. So I'm still a product of that world. So I'm just now I do X and I do LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, they're both great. Well, I'll put those direct links down below, as well as a link to your book. Thank you for your service and coming on today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, sir, and appreciate the time to share with you and your audience.